Palingenesis by Simon Harewood. Book 3, Heart of the Sear. Chapter 5, Escape from the Underground. The hours passed in soothing silence. Lund felt the ache in body and mind fade to a dull throbbing. Somewhere between sleep and wakefulness, he saw the events unfold once more, the terrific struggle in the Roning pit, the fearful apparition rearing up ahead, its fierce pride, its irresistible power. Then the cages opened. The nightmare creatures were unleashed. Slowly he tried to find his way through the throng. Somewhere he knew there was refuge, but the huge bodies hemmed him in, and he was down, crawling. Ahead was the passage between tall cages. A figure lay face down, barring the way. He knew the boy. The body was too heavy for him to move. He could hardly drag his own along. There was another, familiar to him, wanting to help, straining, sobbing. At last help arrived. Hands reached for them, pulling them into the breach. They were safe. Brithael moved his arms, then his legs. There seemed to be no fractures. Carefully, he explored his abdomen with outstretched fingers. There were no holes or substantial punctures. He took a deep breath and felt his ribs. Some pain and discomfort here, but perhaps nothing cracked or broken. It was his head, he realized, that demanded attention. It was difficult to move it from side to side. Pain shot through his neck and the back of his skull every time he adjusted it ever so slightly, and his vision blurred. The swipe from that unknown terror had knocked something loose inside his head. He closed his eyes. Someone had pulled him to safety. He was alive, beyond the reach of the monsters. That was all that mattered. A soft voice spoke close by.
Brith, can you hear me?
He opened his eyes again and considered nodding, but stopped himself just in time. Even moving his jaw to open his mouth was painful.
Saratran.
Don't talk. See if you can drink this.
She held up a cup of something. It had a strange smell. He felt her hand behind his head, lifting it slightly. Her face swam into view. The torchlight leaped about, drawing lines of fire across the cavern roof. The cool liquid spilled into his mouth. When he had done, she let him slip back onto something warm and soft. Everything dissolved into darkness. The Roning pit was a scene of horror and carnage. The bodies of men and beasts strewn about like puppets. The creatures that survived were squabbling and fighting over the spoils, tearing at the bodies of the fallen, slaking their long thirst for violent gain. Half-starved as they were, the Ronings snarled and clawed their way from one side to the other, competing for dominance and the right to ownership. Their vicious roars, their braying, triumphant cries rose up into the dome above, surrounding the platform with its motionless wheel. Two small figures lay just as still, listening to the tearing ferocity below. Now and then the smaller of the two peeped over the edge into the dark void, only to retreat again in haste. The other lay trembling, clutching his arm, the shaft of an arrow between his fingers. A pool of blood had congealed on the planks under his armpit. At last the smaller one touched his shoulder and whispered,
Rennie, we have to get it out.
The other nodded.
I know.
He sat up, shivering violently.
We have to push it through and break off the head. Then you must pull it out, Ren.
His teeth were chattering.
Give me the girdle.
The younger boy passed him a leather girdle carrying his sheath and blade. Brennick put the thickest part between his teeth. They could not afford drawing any attention to themselves. He drew in his breath and bit down hard. Rin's fingers trembled at the thought of causing his companion pain. He gripped the shaft firmly, however, and pushed till the entire arrowhead protruded from the inside of Brennick's arm. The boy threw back his head and gasped. Rin placed the hilt of his knife under the shaft, knelt on it, and snapped off the head. Before Brennick could react to this, he yanked the flighted end as hard as he dared. Out came the shaft, covered in blood. Rin stared at it in disgust. He was tempted to toss it over the rail into the pit below, but he remembered their need for silence just in time and placed it carefully on the wooden deck instead. Brennick sat with his back to the rail, moaning under his breath and clutching the bleeding arm.
Let me see it.
Rin knelt next to the reclining figure. Slowly the fingers pulled away to reveal a crimson trickling hole.
We have nothing with which to tie it up.
Brennick did not turn his head.
It doesn't matter. Let it bleed a bit. Maybe the dirt will come out and it won't go bad.
He opened his eyes. Rin could see how hard he was trying to be brave. He spoke softly, half embarrassed by his boldness.
You can cry if you want to. I won't tell anyone.
Brennick did not reply, but brought his right hand up to his temples. For a few moments they just sat in silence. When he brought his hand away again, there was a smear of blood on his brow and along the bridge of his nose, to mingle with the streaks of soot covering his face and hair. He spoke through clenched teeth.
Have you tried speaking to Lond?
Ren nodded.
I can't find him.
Brennick looked at him in alarm.
He isn't dead. No, just sleeping or fainted maybe.
Brennick shivered again.
I wish I could talk to him like that.
Ren got up and went round him to sit on his uninjured side.
Are you cold?
Brennick shrugged.
A little. We should have kept that fellow's cloak, the one we shoved off to turn the wheel. He is not 20 feet below us, dangling on the rope. Perhaps I can get down there and fetch him.
Brennick wanted to protest, but the shivering was growing worse. The thought of a covering of some sort was comforting. Ren stole over the edge of the platform with a show of courage that he did not feel. His toes and fingers ached, his fear mounted with each careful step. Far below, the creatures swarmed still over their prey. A single glance in their direction set him to gasping and trembling so that he had to halt, gripping the beams in a panic. He closed his eyes and hugged the rough wood till it hurt his bare chest. He would have to go back if he could still move. Brennick's whisper reached down to him.
He's just beneath you. You can reach the rope and pull him closer.
Ren opened his eyes. Had one of the things down there noticed him? Would it come crawling up the scaffold to drag him down? No, they were chained, he remembered. Chained to their cages. He breathed again. The heavy rope was but 2 feet away. He could reach it. Carefully, he let go of the beam and descended another 5 feet. The man was hanging in front of him, his cloak caught beneath the rope tied under his armpits. He undid the clasp and started tugging on the garment. It came loose suddenly, almost causing him to lose his footing on the crossbeam whereon he stood. Again the panic surged through him. Brennick whispered once more, reassuringly.
You've got it. Bring it up.
Ren draped the cloak round his neck and started the ascent. He sighed with relief when Brennick's good hand reached down to help him over the edge again. Soon they huddled under the smelly garment, not caring that it had belonged to a dead enemy moments before. Brennick was considering their situation. He looked across at the far end where the ropes had been cut.
Those keepers all fell into the pit. But there are many more in the town. We can't get out that way. We have no rope to reach the bridge.
Ren pointed out. The gangway dangled into the abyss, suspended only by the ropes on the far side.
What if they come back? They know we are here. Or do they? They can pick us off with their bows.
Ren's reply sounded small, fearful.
We could climb over the rail and go down a bit. They can't reach us there. They'll just throw a rope. We couldn't stop them from coming across. Not with other bowmen watching. We'd better keep quiet then and wait. Lund will come for us. Yes.
Brennick knew this to be more than an expression of hope. The champion would find a way to get them out of the terrible position they were in. This certainty made the pain fade to an endurable level, and kept the hunger cramps at bay. If only there was some way to find water. Lund slowly floated up to full consciousness. A vast contentment enveloped him, soothing every sensation of bodily hurt or distress. The destroyer of Grail, the unassailable beast of the burnt clearing, had been vanquished. Its demise was the birth of hope, the sprouting of possibility. While it lived, there was no other fate for the slaves but eventual extermination. Someone was sitting next to him, watching for him to stir.
Seridwin.
He reached out to take her hand. Her quick smile was invigorating.
You are not hurt?
He sat up.
Scratches. Mostly tired. I could not control it as I ought to have.
I guess you will want something to eat then.
He nodded. Seridwin handed a gourd to him.
Urine left this for you. Drink it, and I will bring you something right away.
Thank you.
He grasped it, glancing at the dark liquid inside.
How long have I slept?
Half a day, perhaps. It is hard to tell in this place.
She rose to go. He remembered suddenly.
Brith? He is with us still?
She nodded and pointed to a dark corner of the cavern.
He took a severe blow to the head and is a little confused. He will have to be still for a while.
Lund emptied the vessel without delay. The draught was familiar to him by now, one of Kor's brews, handed down in time to be preserved. He placed the empty gourd on the ground next to his pallet and, rising to his feet, made his way over to the silent figures among whom he hoped to find his friend. Brith lay on his back, his head immobilized by bundles of cloth. His eyes were half open and his breathing regular. As Lund knelt next to him, his gaze shifted to meet him. A faint smile spread over his face. His voice was low and strangely monotone.
Your wild plan worked, then?
Lund reached down to grip his hand.
The great beast is no more, and the both of us are here still to celebrate it.
The fingers gripped his tightly, almost frantically. There was something strange in the touch.
I knew it didn't end here, but I could not feel it.
Brith cleared his throat and passed his tongue over dry lips.
Not till now.
There was a cup of water next to him. Lund lifted it for him to drink. The odd sensation intensified till suddenly he realized what it was.
You've had a dream.
Brith touched his hand and took away the cup.
I have seen it. The frozen rain floating down.
He smiled painfully.
We must go north to the end of the world, to the tall mountains there. That is where he lives.
Lund had no need of asking who he meant. The winged man, the great one who had heard his many prayers, who had given him the means to strike back. He was real and living somewhere up the northern road. Quickly, he slipped the blade from its sheath and held it out to Brith, hilt first.
He has shown you one of these.
He has.
Brith took the ragged, wrapped hilt and held the weapon at arm's length. The edges caught the low torchlight coming to life, drawing into the crystal heart a dull glow of potential. Slowly it expanded, settling into honed perfection, at once awe-inspiring and beautiful. He was smiling, his eyes wide.
I have one with a greenish hue. I know the marking on the hilt.
If you describe it to me, I will fetch it for you. Sleep now, and when you wake, you'll be yourself again.
When he turned to go, Seridwin was standing there, a steaming bowl and a hunk of bread in her hands. They went back to his pallet without speaking, where he set to with a will. Gradually the throb in his temples faded. While he ate, she filled him in on how the Vran had fared. Not a single slave who had stepped into the roaning pit the day before had escaped unscathed. Of the 100 who ventured out, 47 had been slain or seriously wounded. The remainder would be fit again shortly. Many weapons had been lost also, and were scattered among the bodies on the pit floor. Even the boys sent to hook the cables had not returned. A shock passed through him at the news. Brennick was gone then, and the two he had rescued from the tanning yard. She saw the sadness steal over him.
I am sorry. I know they were special to you.
We owe those boys everything. Without them, the cages would not have opened, and it had all been a waste of life.
He raised a hand to his brow and closed his eyes. Rin was there still, alive and eager, waiting for his call. Lund glanced up at Seridwin and shook his head.
They are there still, on the platform in the pit. There would have been no chance for them to escape.
He turned his thought to the boy.
Rin, where are you? Is Brennick with you?
He could sense the boy's immense relief.
We are here still, at the wheel. There is no way out. Brennick is hurt.
Is he bad? Can you stay there for a while?
The bleeding has stopped, but he shivers and talks to himself. We cannot move, for the bridge is broken. We will wait for you here.
That is good. I will come soon. Stay still and out of sight.
There was no reply, but he knew the reassurance had brought Rin comfort. He rose to his feet. Seridwin put a hand on his arm.
They are safe?
On the platform, but trapped there till I can fetch them back. We have to decide what to do.
Let Brith sleep for a while.
Brennick is hurt and feverish. I have to do something for them.
Her fingers dug into his arm.
We cannot reach them there. The pit is overrun with the Ronings. We are as trapped as they are, perhaps even worse.
Lund realized the truth of the statement. Unless they could fight their way through the Beater army in the chimney cavern, the Ronings would keep them prisoner here as surely as the Torque had done. Their rations would dwindle ere long. It was an impossible situation. He could find replacements enough for the injured slaves, but the weapons of the fallen were beyond his reach. Also, any raid on the Beater host would be extremely risky. The tunnels would have to be reopened while under guard. Perhaps it would be better to conserve their energy for digging a new tunnel to the outside. They were miners enough for that. This meant, however, that the boys on the platform would be abandoned to their fate. Seridwin was still staring at him.
How do we get out of here?
We have to start the tunnel as soon as possible. There will be no destroyer now to stop our flight through the forest.
Brennick and Rin?
He shrugged, frowning heavily.
Once we are out, if they live still, we could reach them from the outside.
Rin woke to the cramping of his stomach. How long had he slept? It felt like a long time, perhaps a whole night. Brennick was silent and motionless at last, breathing deeply. That was surely a good sign. He strained his ears into silence. Things were oddly quiet below. The tearing and snarling had stopped. What was happening? Rin quietly slipped out from under the cloak, careful not to disturb his companion. He inched towards the edge till he could peep over it. The feeding pit was completely silent. Nothing stirred to attract his attention in the murky recesses of the arena. Where were the Ronings? He could make out the remains of the fallen men, the yawning space in the center where the great fire breather had been. Suddenly he understood. Rin reached back to touch Brennick's shoulder.
Brennick! Wake up! Wake up quickly!
There was a moan, and the drowsy voice replied.
What? What is it? Shh! Don't talk! Just look!
Brennick, the cloak still wrapped about him, slithered to the edge on his stomach. He peered down intently, but could not make out anything. He turned questioning eyes on Rin.
Look at the cages!
He frowned and looked down again. Then he straightened up onto his knees.
They've gone back!
The beasts, conditioned through many cycles of routine, had crawled back into their open cages, their immediate needs met by the incursion and subsequent feast. Crazed with hunger as they had been, the Ronings had gorged themselves and were sleeping it off within the security of their demarcated lairs. Brennick was quivering with excitement.
We have to cut the ropes! The weight of the cage doors will turn the wheel.
Ren nodded. One would have to cut the rope from which the dead body was still suspended, while the other freed the wheel.
I will do it. You must cut the tie on the wheel.
It was different now that the monsters were no longer loud and obvious beneath them. There was nothing with which to contend but the height and the hunger-induced weakness in his limbs. It was strange how the mere wakefulness of these horrors could rob one of resolve and animation. He leaned over the side with his knife and started sawing away at the thick rope. The strands parted one by one. His heart was beating in his ears. If the Ronings could be trapped in their cages, they were saved. What was more, the slaves would have a way out of the underground. When the rope finally separated, Brennick sliced through the rawhide tie, keeping the wheel from turning. The ropes and chains were taut already. The sudden pull sent the wheel spinning as the heavy iron doors slipped down into place. A resounding metallic clang echoed through the cavern and the passages beyond. At first, nothing happened. Soon there was a snort and sounds of shuffling. The boys leaned over the edge and stared down. There was no movement on the pit floor. Could it be that all the beasts were sealed back in? Was there one or two perhaps that had escaped? Surely they would have been stirred into action by the loud noise. Rin stared at Brennick with large eyes. Could it be true? A familiar voice broke through his thoughts.
What happened? What was that noise? Did it come from the pit?
He was so excited that it was difficult to formulate a clear thought.
We closed the cages. The Ronings went back in. I think they're all trapped again.
There was a pause. He could sense the incredulity and amazement in Lund's next touch.
You are sure? You can see no others about?
Even the ones in the cages are not moving. Nothing else stirs down there.
Lund had made his decision.
I will take a look. Stay where you are.
The pit was eerily silent. Lund touched the cold stone of the wall next to the breach. His blade was in his other hand, extended to its full length. He took a cautious step forward. The cages next to him were empty. Either their occupants had been slain, or they were lurking somewhere among the shadows. The reek of death and animal filth washed over him. He caught his breath, retching. Slowly, his skin prickling with anticipation, he stepped out into the arena. Nothing moved. Not even one head turned in his direction. Were they sleeping? How was that possible after the resounding noise of the doors dropping? Were they so overly sated on flesh that they were not interested in more prey? He would challenge them, call them out. The pale light in the center beckoned, and he strode into it, fearlessly, openly, the blade a blazing wand of blue. He lifted it high, planting his feet in the bloody dust, and shouted defiance over and over. Here and there the great reptilian heads turned, and he heard the heavy breathing and the rumbling deep-throated growls. But nothing stirred to meet him. No powerful body was hurled at the bars in snarling aggression. Lund lowered the blade. The miracle was real. They had a way out. He searched about for the carcass of the great beast. Where he had seen it slain, there remained nothing but piles of ashes. The bodies of 2 Ronings it had killed before being overcome still marked the place of its demise, where the terrible form itself had decayed with impossible rapidity. Once the life that had conjured its warped form had departed, there was nothing to keep the abomination from disintegrating. He called down the boys and waited for them amidst the carnage. There were no snapping jaws or reaching claws to challenge them as they clambered over the cages and down onto the pit floor. He sheathed his weapon and gripped them tightly around the shoulders.
You have done it. You have killed the destroyer and opened the door for all of us.
Brennick shied away from his embrace, cringing. Lund took hold of his blood-smeared arm.
Have Liren see to it. You want to keep it. A champion needs both his arms.
The boys stared up at him, glowing.
Rin too. I would be dead if he wasn't there.
Ren too. Champions for the Vron.
They stood, bright-eyed and proud, among the silent bodies, the sleeping Torque beasts, unafraid. Within the hour, Lund led a scouting party up the ramp and into the town of Grail. They penetrated as far as the arena without challenge. The place seemed deserted. Even the great court underground was retaken without a struggle. The rope ladders leading down into the chimney were still there, unattended in the dark. There was no motion below on the ledge of the cavern, no torches, no fires. Lund was mystified. Perhaps 300 enemy warriors had perished in the Ronin pit with their master. A similar number had been left in the chimney cavern, and at least another 100 in the town. Where had they disappeared to? Were they hiding? Waiting somewhere in ambush for the slaves to stumble out of their refuge? Perhaps they believed the Vran were weakened, their best warriors slain or wounded. Now would be the time to lure them out and end their resistance. He wanted to bring all the slaves through the Ronin pit to the great court before the creatures became violent again. Even though they were confined once more, and could do little harm, he dreaded dragging the thousands of small ones through the arena with a fearsome display raging on all sides. After consulting with Brith, Lathan, and Ceridwen, he decided to risk it. Enough weapons and armor were gathered from the pit floor to equip a force equal in number to what they might face. The great court was not easy to access from outside, there being but 3 approaches, and all no wider than doorways. The large number of vulnerable slaves could be kept safe here. They gathered for the march, in their makeshift families, their bundles and remaining supplies on their backs. Word had spread that they were going back to the light, to the open air, after so many dark, fearful days in the dank underground. There was a tangible excitement drowning out the apprehension. A great enemy had been vanquished. The strongest of the Torque oppressors could be overcome after all. Yet they clung together in their little groups when trotting swiftly through the Ronin pit, the terror of that place beating at them, the slowly stirring monsters a stalking threat. Up the ramp they went, past the guards with their bright spears, Vran for once, through the doorway and into the great court. Here they settled, nervously, wherever Lathan or Ceridwen directed them. They regarded the slanted rays of the sun falling through the open cavern roof above, and tugged one another's sleeves to point and marvel at it. They approached the dark edge of the chimney, peered down at what had been their prison far below, and back at where the warriors stood. Could the long night be over at last? Would they be free to leave the underground forever? When the last slave had passed through the feeding pits, Lund had them lock the gates to that place of horror. They stood with him, looking through the bars at the beasts beyond. An older man spoke the question on their minds. "Do we kill them?" There was a quick reply.
We leave them. Why waste our time and effort on these abominations? Let them stay and starve.
Lund agreed.
I will not touch them. We leave them as we found them. These creatures should never have been. They belong here in their prison.
There were nods at these words, and they turned to walk up the ramp, away from the nightmare designed for their destruction, each one hoping never to visit it again. They called a council in the court. Scouts would have to be sent out once more to explore Grail. Others would have to be sent down the chimney to discover the whereabouts of the remaining beaters. Lund wanted to be part of both groups. He sorely missed the injured Brith, with whom he was able to communicate over distance. None of the other eligible scouting leaders shared this affinity with him. He would have to send out Rin with the group he would not accompany. The boy could keep him informed about the progress made in his absence. The scouting of the town seemed more risky to him. He picked 4 youths with care, tried companions, wearing the great Torque's mark on their upper arms. They were fleet and resilient, the veterans of the royal hunt and the battles of the underground. Lund waited for dusk before setting out. The beaters did not possess the Torque or Vran ability to penetrate the dark with their vision. Darkness was a great advantage. It was possible that no Torque remained in Grail. The Destroyer and the former master, Groth, had been the last of their kind as far as he knew. The entire enemy host were dark men with dog eyes, almost blind in the dark. One by one they slipped out of the outer gate and into the night air. There were Vran watchmen posted out here already. None of them had seen any activity. Silently, the scouts sprinted up the passageway to the arena. There were no lights in any of the nearby dwellings, no smell of cooking fires. A strange quiet hung over the place, like a pall of smoke. Lund halted the band in the lee of the arena wall. Where would the enemy set up their ambush? What part of Grail would they be unwilling to give up? The strongest structure was the Lord's Keep in the center. To surrender that without a struggle would be foolish. If any warriors were still about, that was the place to find them. He beckoned to the others, and they moved out at a trot, keeping to the shadows. Moving from one hiding place to another, they crossed the rubble-strewn section in front of the tall walls of the keep. Not a single window was lit. The gate stood ajar. All was quiet. If it were a trap, Lund thought, it was skillfully laid. He halted at the gate and motioned to the others to line the wall just outside it. Carefully he peered through. The courtyard was silent and deserted as he expected. They would not show themselves till the last possible moment. Had they supposed that he would come here? Were they luring him in as he had lured their master? He waved one of the scouts through and up the stairs to the top of the wall. A lookout on the wall could warn them of approaching enemies. Next, he considered what he would do in the place of his opponent. The guard rooms beside the gatehouse would be stocked with his best men. Across the courtyard he would station archers on the wall to bring down any intruders and prevent their escape. Others would be kept in readiness outside to shut the gate behind the slaves. The walls would have to be explored first. He sent another scout to circle the courtyard wall, checking inside windows as he went. Those who remained would keep the gate till he returned. While waiting, Lund kept a close watch on the guard rooms. Even as he scrutinized the surrounding yard and doorways, the impression of desolation and abandonment intensified. It was simply too quiet, lifeless, cold. What was left of the Beater army was not in the citadel. He stepped through the gate even before the scout returned, blade in hand. Nothing happened as he passed the silent, empty guard room. No warrior shouted or leaped out of hiding as he made his way through the gaping doorways into the structure itself. No one stood at the post of duty in front of the hall or prison passage ahead. He was inside, breathing through his open mouth, listening. Finally, his aching ears caught a sound. A cough, far off and isolated, but a sign of life nonetheless. He froze in his tracks, his heartbeat quickening. All his instincts warned him to turn and run. The sound did not come from a Vran throat. There were enemies here still, alive within this place. By some miracle, the slave scouts had not been noticed yet. It was time to beat a hasty retreat. A shadow moved on the wall. Ahead there was lamplight. He lingered. There was no urgency in the movement, no shouted commands, no tramping of hurrying feet. With the utmost care, he started towards it, every sense aroused. To the left, through an open doorway, down a flight of shallow steps, another noise arrested him, the moaning of a wounded man. The light beckoned him to another doorway, opening onto a mess hall. Keeping to the darkness behind a column, he peered through. The trestles and benches had been removed, and low cots brought in to make the place into an infirmary. Several of the cots were occupied. The cough sounded up again, startlingly close. It came from one of the prostrate forms. Lund pulled back into the shadows to consider his options. The beaters would not have left their weak and wounded men in harm's way if they intended to set a trap here. It was unlikely that such an ambush would not have been sprung outside in the courtyard. There were no guards posted anywhere, not even here, and there was no one attending the wounded. Could it be that the cowards had abandoned Grail entirely? He would have to bring out his full force and explore the entire town. Even if there was an attempted ambush, the slaves would hold their own now that the torque over Sear and his master had perished. Lund retreated stealthily, making his way back to the courtyard. Here he signaled to his men. They would return to the court for reinforcements. On the way back, he felt for Rin's mind. There was an immediate reply.
There is no one down here. Only some barrels of water and a few supplies.
Have they gone all the way down the side tunnels?
They have. And we went to the cave-in. There's no sign of them. Did you see any in the town?
No. Tell the scouts to come back up.
He could hardly hope for such a possibility. The beaters had fled the town. All signs pointed to it, though. He would go back and take the wounded they had left behind in the citadel as prisoners. Perhaps these could be persuaded to volunteer more information. As soon as Lund and the band of Vran entered the room, the men on the cots were overcome with mortal fear. One of them covered his face with an arm as if to ward off an unexpected death blow. Two more set up a chorus of begging and pleading for their lives. Of course, they could expect nothing but the most severe retribution from the ones they had been commissioned to exterminate. 3 of the beaters in the infirmary were already dead. This was a good sign, surely. No one appeared to be caring for these men anymore. They had almost certainly been abandoned. Lund commanded the 4 survivors to silence. They lay watching him fearfully, uncertain. When he addressed them further, they trembled visibly.
You were in the underground. You were wounded in the struggles there.
The biggest man, a powerfully built beater with his right arm badly mauled, spoke for all of them.
Yes, master. We...
Do not address me as that. I am no man's master but my own.
The beater stared, unsure. He made another attempt.
We were in the pit yesterday.
He was shaking now.
Only a few got out.
What has happened to the hundreds who were down in the cavern?
When the Great One fell, everyone lost heart. They said the slaves
He hesitated.
would set the demons loose to destroy the town. They said you had nothing to lose.
Lund smiled to himself. That might have been a good idea. He nodded to the man to continue.
All the strong men, the war leaders, are dead, except for Hatur. And he brought the men up from below and decided to leave the town.
Where did they go?
They were going back to our country, up the road and then to the west.
Beyond the trees?
Lund could feel his excitement mounting.
Far beyond, to our own tree lands and the sea.
The sea. He had heard of that before. Suddenly he had hundreds of questions. These men came from the world beyond the forest, of which the slaves knew so little.
What lies beyond the trees? Where does the northern road lead?
The beater seemed to consider this carefully. Was he about to tell an untruth? Perhaps the fact that slaves could address him in his own language had only just sunk in. He was more calculating than Lund supposed, though. Being in such a hopeless position, there remained but one commodity with which to bargain.
We will tell you all you want to know, if you will allow us to go back to our people.
Lund looked down at the beater. He was a mortal enemy, had perhaps struck down many slaves and exulted in the killing. Beads of sweat were running down the sides of his face. Some had pooled round his lips. The arm was in a mess. It would probably never be strong again. The man's warrior days were over. The others with him were not much better off, or they would not have been abandoned here. They no longer posed a threat.
Agreed.
He could see relief flooding the man's face. Some suspicion remained, though. There could be little trust between them. One of the Vran took him aside and spoke urgently in words the captives would not know.
You will let them go?
Yes, but first they will tell me about the world outside the forest.
But they will fetch help from the north, like they did during the uprising.
The main host has already fled there. They will have raised the alarm. It will make no difference to our cause whether these poor fellows live or die. Why should I spill their blood? Also, we will leave here before they do.
You plan to leave?
We may be forced to.
He turned back to the beater.
Now, tell me where the road leads.
By the time he had exhausted his many questions, Lund was completely astonished. He had difficulty in believing many of the things told him. The man's description of the sheer size of the outside could scarce be credited. As soon as the town had been secured and the slaves brought up out of the court, all these things would have to be weighed and discussed so that they could decide on a course of action. If only Kor had still been alive, all the information would not have seemed so intimidating. By noon, all the patrols had reported back. There was no sign of life anywhere in the town. The gates to the north had been left open, and there were signs of a hasty withdrawal in that direction. Grail was in their hands once more. Lund gave the orders to bring out the slaves and install them in the structures of the town. He left Lathan and Seridwen in charge of who would be placed where. Food would have to be procured from somewhere. They were running short on rations. The prisoners showed them where the supplies of the lost garrison were kept. These would add several days' worth of sustenance to what they had. But soon they would be hard-pressed to subsist in Grail. He watched them coming back up into the sunlight. It was a bright afternoon, with the golden orb in a cloudless sky. The empty streets no longer had the smell of the oppressors about them, but of green growing things and tiny flowers already sprouting from the cracks. The first slaves stepped out of the dark passage almost tentatively, narrowing their eyes against the glare. They seemed pale and worn, the products of too much fear and apprehension. The small ones clung to the hands of their elders, staring about them in timid wonder, their heads turning this way and that. Soon unbelieving little smiles appeared on their faces, and one or two broke from the long line of bodies to run about without direction or purpose, other than expressing the unconfined joy of basking in the warm, free air. They played and frolicked in silence, these little Vran slaves, always aware of the need for concealment and secrecy. As he looked on, Lund felt the sorrow rise up in him, painfully, powerfully. But stronger still was the resolve that no one would make sport of them any longer. They would never again be driven with the lash, or hunted down like animals in the forest. There would be no arenas for them, where they would have to spill the blood of their brothers, no dark sheds where they would be broken for the pleasure of others. They were out in the light again, to be warmed by the sun and comforted by hope. He felt it then, driving back the sorrow, an immense gratitude, a soaring assurance that the dark journey was nearing its end, and all the children would find their way back home. On they came, the women old and young, the hunched-over men from the mines, the workers from the clearings, the boys from the yards. As they passed him, they looked up, and he saw their eyes filled with gratitude and love. He acknowledged the small signs, the nods, the whispered words. Everything he had hoped for, had bled and suffered for, walked by in front of his eyes. The fearful runs in the forest, the beatings, the blows he had struck, the terrible rush of death so many times averted. This was what had driven him, this had been in his heart, yet inexpressible, all those long dark days. And the sunlight spilled over into him till he felt his soul ablaze with it. This was a good day, a day of miracles and the fulfillment of dreams. He prayed that it could last forever, or at least for the wonderment of it to remain with him for as long as he would be alive. In the council room of the Torque Lords of Grail, the slaves sat down to deliberate. 7 in all were present, Brithael among them, though he appeared a little glassy-eyed and tired. Old Lathan was there for supplies, Seridwen also, and others to represent the 3 clans they had hastily organized. Each of these groups contained about 2,000 souls. The remaining 900 had been equipped with weapons and placed under Brith's command as warriors. A special band, including Brennick and Rin, as well as the branded survivors of the royal hunt, remained with Lund as scouts. Even this small amount of structure brought a sense of security and purpose to the slave body. They were masters of their own fate now. Lund looked at the group round the polished torque table and nodded to them before he spoke.
Our former masters are dead or driven off. We have to decide our course, where we are going, and how to keep everyone safe till we get there.
Lathan spoke their surprise.
You mean for us to leave Grail?
We will have to leave. The sooner the better. Our food supplies will not last much longer, and there is nothing here to sustain us. If we remain, we will starve.
Can we not return to the farm clearings?
Do any of the herds remain? Are there stalks of grain or barley?
No, but...
Then what will we plant? How will we survive while we wait for the crops to grow?
Lund shook his head.
There are simply too many of us. We cannot hunt to feed all these children.
He turned to Lathan again.
How long can we go on half rations?
The old man looked perturbed.
I estimate we have 14 days, no more.
Lund nodded.
Then we have to move as quickly as we can. Brith, the carts brought up from the farm clearings, have they been located?
Yes, most of them were abandoned among the rubble when the people first came in. They are close by.
Good. We will use these carts to carry what we need northwards.
Where are we going?
Seridwin asked. Lund turned to Brith.
Tell them.
All the eyes turned to Brith. He cleared his throat nervously.
The winged man who has given us the blades and the dreams lives far to the north, in a place where the frozen rain falls from the sky. I know we must find him.
Voices rose up around the table.
How far?
How do you know this?
Frozen rain?
Lund raised his hands.
I have discovered many things when I questioned the captive beaters. There is a place like Brith saw, but it is a great distance from here, and we will have to pass through many dangers to reach it.
The faces were frowning at him. They waited for him to continue.
There is a war in the north, a great war in which many, many people will die. The hosts of the Torque have gathered to overthrow all the lands beyond the forest, and to enslave all those who dwell in them, even the peoples who live beyond the great lake they call the sea. There are more beasts like the Destroyer to aid them.
There was a gasp of dismay at this. Some spoke up.
We cannot go north.
We have to go to the clearings.
What lies to the east?
Lund shook his head.
We cannot ignore this war.
More shouts rose up.
What?
We cannot fight the Torque.
Why can we not ignore it?
Lund waited for them to fall silent.
We cannot ignore it because it is fought against our people, our fatherland in the far north. Nuria, they called it.
Shocked stares surrounded him. No one could utter a word.
Yes, there are others like us. I saw one at the edge of the trees on the line. Brennick saw some in his dream. I know that all the strength of the Torque is against them now, to destroy them as they would destroy us. Even if we found a hiding place in the east or survived in this place, they will come back to burn us out and kill every last one. We do not have the strength to fight them, but perhaps we could slip out and escape northwards while they are gone off to war. Perhaps we could join with our brothers and knit our strength with theirs. If we stay here, we will die. If not tomorrow, then soon enough. What we have to decide is where we will go.
They looked at one another round the table. Brith spoke up.
What are the perils you mentioned?
We will have to pass through the Torque lands. They have cities to the north with walls and towers. It could be that there remain sufficient men in these to harass us as we pass. We may have to fight our way through or steal past at night. There may also be too little food for our march. We could run out before we see the northern lands. The Torque homeland is lacking in fertile fields. You know how many carts went north from our clearings to sustain them. On the road we may be vulnerable to attack from fire breathers or an ambush by the beaters.
Brith dropped his head into his hands. Even Lathan looked perturbed. The three clan leaders were equally dismayed. Only Seridwin showed any enthusiasm. She rose to her feet, speaking excitedly.
Do you forget so soon what we have achieved already? Less than a season ago, no one dreamed that we could be sitting here with our masters overcome. My heart burst within me the first time I heard that someone, some slave runner, had slain a mighty Torque hunter. It was impossible, they said. Even our own people doubted the report. But it was true, and I knew that there was a change in the stars, that soon something great would happen. Then came the news of the uprising, where many enemy warriors were slain, and worthless slaves had done it, had taken the town and burned the masters out. Was that not impossible? And when these heroes came down,
She pointed to Brith and Lund.
to the clearing, they were marked for death, and the brutes swore to kill them slowly. Are they not here today, alive still, and strong? Have you seen our people, filling the stone houses of the masters, eating from their plates, wearing their clothes, who were naked and hungry and homeless, who were brought underground to the pits to be fed to their beasts? Did you not walk through that place? Did you not see the bodies of our enemies strewn about, and the ashes of the mighty destroyer among them? How many impossible things have you seen with your own eyes? Would you now go and hide in a pit somewhere to wait for death? Can you not feel the change as I did? You are not slaves anymore. You are free men to decide your fate. Do not let fear put the chains back on you now.
She turned to face Lund.
I will go north and nowhere else.
Lund smiled at her and took her hand.
And not in a barrel either.
Her laugh filled the room. Brith stared at them, a little embarrassed by his own timidity. How unafraid they were. Perhaps Saragun was right. Change had come to the slaves. It had come in the form of this youth, this warrior, this champion. Had he not known it that first time, that by this one's intervention his life was spared on the hunt? Lathan was smiling too.
We trust your judgment in this. You have not led us astray. We are all alive today because of what you have led us to achieve. Staying here is impossible. Fleeing east or west will not save us. If we are to perish in this northern war, we will perish as free people, with honor and dignity.
The remaining councillors nodded in agreement. If they were a little less enthusiastic, it mattered not. They could hardly disagree in the face of such statements of brave loyalty. There was no real alternative to following the one who had brought them that far. The slaves would linger one more day in Grail. This would give the wounded an opportunity to recover some of their strength for the march. Lathan's helpers scoured the town for supplies and clothing. The carts were drawn up in the main street before the gates to be loaded with such essentials as bedding, food, and water. Excitement mounted as the day wore on. This would be their last night in the hated town of the Torque. Already rumors were spreading of a fantastical land to the north, where no one worked hard and the food was rich and plentiful. Vran were their own masters there, and no one was uncared for or alone. Children whispered in little groups, things they had overheard, amazing things that could not possibly be true. Yet they believed them and multiplied them, till the Northland became a paradise with baskets of fruit and cheeses and skewers of meat, sweet ales and meads and music, dancing and laughter. Everyone was happy and wore the finest clothes of fabrics never seen before, soft like a caress on the skin. The Northland, they whispered and laughed gleefully. Tomorrow they were heading out to find it. Lund walked through the dark streets after nightfall. There were many painful memories for him in Grail. More than 6 cycles before, they had dragged him up here on a chain from the farm clearings. He could feel the sting of the lash still, the paralyzing fear, the unbearable loneliness. Then the golden voice inside his head, the birth of hope, and the courage of another keeping him alive. Kor was gone, swallowed in time, but his vision and care had given all his people a chance to escape this place. He watched the twin moons ascend, their cold stare fixed on him. They would fly away at last, to leave the nightmare behind. The long column stood ready, waiting for his signal. Lund scanned the line of excited slaves. It was strange how he still thought of them as such. That would change this day. The Vran would leave behind their slavery, their fears, the darkness of their past. Once free of Grail, they would become something else, a people moving where they chose, to gain their own place once more. The scouts had gone out early that morning. Every hour he would receive their reports. If there were enemies up ahead, he would be warned in good time. Each clan had 200 guards to protect them. Another 300 would march at the head of the column with Brith. Even if they were surprised, there were enough spears to stop an assault and allow the rest to join the battle. If the intelligence was correct, the Torque would not be able to muster more than 500 warriors in the south. Not that the Vran guards were warriors. Lund looked them over again. Boys of 13 cycles, holding the long spears proudly. Here and there a sturdy lad of 16 or more, at least partially filling the leather tunics pilfered from the enemy. Old men with dull eyes and drooping shoulders, their hair already white. Not one in the prime of life. But he had seen them beat back the enemy. They had stood bravely in the Roning pit. And now there were 15 among them to wield the blade. He reached up to touch the amulet round his neck. The treasure from the ghost cave had been retrieved. Brith had received his blade and the matching amulet. The secrets of these jewels would be unlocked soon. So would the mysteries of the world beyond the sea of trees. All the eyes were fixed on him. Young and old in front of their carts were ready to move out. Lund raised his hand. They were leaving the town, the forest, the lives of horror and degradation. It was a fearful moment, at once solemn and urgent. A hoarse cheer went up from the long column, swelling louder and louder, till the walls and stockade echoed it back to them, and the birds rose startled from the trees. The voices that were never meant to be heard, filled with joy never meant for them to express, for the great deliverance that had come to them, and the tempest of hate that was past. Lund dropped his hand, pointed to the north and up the road to freedom. The feet tramped forward, the cart wheels creaked, the column was on its way.